In 1915, in the midst of the First World War, the systematic annihilation and mass deportation of Armenians began at the hands of the Turks of the Ottoman Empire in both Armenia and Turkey. During these times, from 1915 to 1922, an estimated 1.5 million Armenians were killed, and hundreds of thousands more were deported. Being one of the largest atrocities in history, the Armenian genocide bore a sickening resemblance to the Holocaust and has affected millions of lives over the last 100 years. As early as the 15th century, Armenia, as well as much of the Middle East, was absorbed into the Ottoman Empire. Most of the leaders of the Ottoman Empire during this time were Muslim, whereas Armenians were Christians. Being a religious minority, they had few political and legal rights and were subjected to unfair and unjust treatment. Despite this, Armenians thrived, which angered the Turkish. Abdulhamid II, the 34th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, spearheaded the first attacks on Armenians from 1894 to 1896. Notorious for challenging the Armenian fight for civil rights, Hamid ordered Turkish military officials, soldiers, and citizens to begin the massacre of Armenians. While Armenian cities and towns were defenseless due to a lack of preparation, Turkish military was ordered to come ransack small Armenian towns, kill civilians, and destroy property. These attacks were the beginning of nearly 30 years of violence, hatred, and oppression of the Armenian people. In 1908, a new power rose in the Middle East, the Young Turks. After overthrowing Abdulhamid, they began a new, modernized, constitution-based government, which gave the Armenians hope. This hope was short-lived, however, when World War I began and the Turkish and Armenians joined on opposite sides. The Turkish government began to see Armenians as traitors, which eventually led to them carrying out their goal of removing the Armenians. What is today known as the beginning of the Armenian Genocide began as a massacre of Armenians on April 24, 1915. Over the next few weeks, Turkish government arrested and captured hundreds of Armenians and then brutally executed them. This day marked the beginning of a renewed attempt to eliminate an entire race, and the only thing that followed was more violence. Death marches were held across the Mesopotamian desert, in which people were forced to strip naked and walk until they dropped dead or were shot without access to food or water. The Young Turks appointed killing squads, or butcher battalions, which were comprised of Turkish men, criminals, and trained soldiers, ordered to take out entire villages of Armenians by throwing villages off of cliffs, drowning them, or burning them alive. Armenians were taken from their homes in two groups, a group of able-bodied men and a group of women, children, elderly, and disabled. If they weren't immediately slaughtered, they were turned into slaves who were subjected to horrendous amounts of torture. Similarly to the Holocaust, there were selections in which women, children, elderly, and others were split up. Families were torn apart, children were left alone and stranded, and millions were killed. The systematic persecution and murder lasted over 7 years, but the genocide didn't end with immediate relief. 90% of the Armenian population had been eliminated. 90%. And the remaining women and children were forced to convert to Islam and give up their Armenian identities. Fast forward 61 years to 1983. The Tarossians, a Lebanese Armenian family, migrated from Beirut, Lebanon to Los Angeles, California. My mother, only age 5 at the time, grew up in California and had me. Now, although I've lived in California my whole life, I've never let that get in the way of embracing my heritage. I've always loved learning and embracing my Armenian culture through the language, food, music, and my own family, which has led me to have a deep and meaningful connection with that side of myself. As I've grown up, my desire to learn more about where I'm from has blossomed, as well as my understanding of the seriousness of the history of the Armenian people. Outside of my family, I'd never really heard much about Armenia, Lebanon, or the Armenian people as I grew up, just because there isn't a large population of them in the United States. My father, even though he isn't Armenian, encouraged my sister and I to become immersed in the culture. However, even though we were encouraged to do so, it was always a bit difficult. Because of a censored history and a general lack of representation culturally, I never had the same connection with my roots that I saw other kids my age having. For the most part, I got my information from personal history projects and distant family, which I was satisfied with for a while. As I grew up, though, I started to recognize that Armenia had a deep history that shouldn't be ignored by America. I was about 10 when I began to learn about what the Armenian Genocide was, through an occasional mention of it from my family. At the time, I had no idea what it truly meant or the people that it still affects today. Looking back on what I was taught about the Armenian Genocide is always a little bit difficult, because there was never a time in school I was explicitly taught about it. The only recollection I have about learning about the Armenian Genocide was in 7th grade, when it was mentioned in one paragraph of our history books. It was seemingly used as filler and gave nearly no information about the actual events of the genocide. Because of its lack of importance in our American education, few students my age knew about this massive event that has shaped the history of the entire Middle East. Especially when we're young, our idea of importance comes from the people we hold in the highest respect and what we're taught in school. When we're not taught about the Armenian Genocide in school, people don't hold it the respect that it requires. As you probably know, during the Holocaust, an estimated 6 million Jews were killed, and millions more were affected. In the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million Armenians were killed, and millions more were affected. Throughout school, we spend years learning about the Holocaust because of its size, its atrocities, and the amount of people it still affects today. In my personal experience, I began learning about the Holocaust when I was in 6th grade, and have spent every single year since learning in depth about it. We've spent entire years in history and literature learning about the Holocaust, and we will continue to do so through high school and even into college. Despite this, we spend less than one class period learning about the Armenian Genocide. Why, even though it was approximately a quarter of the size of the Holocaust, do we not dedicate even a quarter of the time to learning about it? The answer to this question is many different parts, beginning with the fact that the genocide is a bit controversial in many parts of the world. Although the science and history is there to show proof of the acts, most countries refuse to officially recognize it as a genocide. Some countries, even ones with large Armenian populations, refuse to recognize it in fear of causing controversy with Turkey. In fact, only 32 out of 195 countries officially recognize the Armenian Genocide. This is because if a country has a good relationship with Turkey, recognizing something that could seem negative or faulty on their part could really damage their relationship. It was only in December of 2019 that the United States recognized the Armenian Genocide, but only after dozens of years of political figures promising the Armenian community that it would happen with no actual intent to do so. This year, in 2020, we commemorate the 105th anniversary of the beginning of the Armenian Genocide. 105 years later, Armenians, especially in schools, are still in danger of violent acts against them. On July 25th, 2020, Kruzin Zakarian Vasporgam, an Armenian elementary school in San Francisco, was vandalized by Azerbaijanis, or Azeris, who are a Turkish ethnic group living in Azerbaijan. Tensions between Armenians and Azeris have been high for decades, but conflict peaked in early July of 2020. Attacks from both militaries have put Armenia and Azerbaijan in a state of danger, but attacks haven't stayed in the Middle East. Attacks on both groups have been recorded worldwide, including many in the United States. Despite its relevance to those living in the United States, this is still not getting any news coverage. A lack of recognition of relevant Middle Eastern news and history leads to a lack of recognition in politics and education, which is where we learn about the importance that history had in the past and the dangers that it poses in the future. Armenia in American education is very limited. Growing up in California, I noticed that few students my age knew where or what Armenia was. Had it not had one of the largest atrocities in history, this would be a little bit more understandable. But given the historical significance of the people and of the country, this is shameful on the part of American public education. Kids grow up not knowing about this massive event that has shaped the history of the world. We know the importance of teaching kids about these events because of the extensive knowledge given to us about the Holocaust. By learning about these events, we learn about the causes and effects and can prevent them from reoccurring in the future. History gives us the power to learn and understand. By sharing the stories of the past, we can work towards a future that's untouched by historical oppression. Share the stories of your past and use your voice to teach others. Don't be afraid to teach about your culture and your heritage, but always be open to listening about others. Thank you.